It's sometime between 6 and 7 in the morning. The year is 1370, and inside the Louvre, not the museum you're thinking of, but a medieval fortress on the banks of the Seine, the most powerful man in France is waking up. His name is Charles V. He's 32 years old. He's thin, pale, and by his own admission, not physically strong. He doesn't fight. He doesn't joust. He doesn't lead armies into battle. And yet, by the time he dies at 42, historians will call him Charles the Wise, one of the most effective kings France has ever had. We know what his day looked like, not from guesswork, not from speculation, but from a woman named Christine de Pizan, whose father served as the king's personal physician and astrologer. She grew up at this court. She watched this man live, and in 1404, she wrote it all down. This is what a single day looked like for a medieval king. Not the battles, not the crowns, just the ordinary rhythm of power. The first thing Charles did each morning was pray. Not publicly, not for show. Privately, in his own chamber, before anyone else entered. Then, once he'd finished, his servants came in, and according to Christine, the king would chat with them. He would joke. He would laugh. This detail stopped me when I first read it, because we tend to imagine medieval kings as distant, formal, untouchable. But here's Christine telling us that Charles started every day by being warm with the people who dressed him. His chamberlain combed his hair. His valet helped him into his robes. The clothing wasn't random. It was chosen based on the day's schedule. A council day meant one thing. A religious feast meant another. Every garment was a signal. Once dressed, his personal chaplain arrived with a breviary, a book of daily prayers organized by the calendar. Together, they read the canonical hours.
This seal marks the true heir.
This wasn't rushed. Christine describes it as a deliberate, focused ritual, something the king treated with genuine reverence. Then, around 8 o'clock, the king walked down through the Louvre to hear Mass. And here's something most people don't realize about the Louvre in the 1370s. It wasn't a museum. It wasn't even really a palace. Charles had just spent years transforming it from a dark military fortress into something livable. His architect, Raymond du Temple, had added elaborate windows, sculpted staircases, gardens to the north, and a series of semi-secret corridors that allowed the king to move through the building without being seen. That detail matters, because Charles was a king who understood the power of controlling when he appeared and when he disappeared. After Mass, the king stepped out of the chapel into the courtyard, and this is where the day shifted from private to intensely public.
The council meets at noon.
Charity is our duty.
Because waiting for him every single morning was a crowd. Christine describes them as all sorts of people, rich or poor, ladies or maidens, widows or others who had problems. They came to petition the king directly, and Charles, according to Christine, would pause, listen, and respond personally. Reasonable requests he granted on the spot. Piteous cases he handled with charity. More complicated matters he passed to a master of requests for further review. Now, a modern reader might think this sounds symbolic, a king pretending to listen to his people. But historian Michael Brower argues something more interesting. The point wasn't efficiency.
Your Grace, the reports are in.
France in the 1370s didn't have a modern bureaucracy that could handle every complaint. The point was the message itself. The king is here. The king is listening. Justice is possible. It's the same reason Charles rode a white horse during state occasions, white being the emblem of sovereignty, while giving black horses to visiting emperors. Everything was communication. After the public audience, Charles withdrew to meet with his royal council. These were the most powerful men in France: dukes, bishops, chancellors, military commanders. And here's where something surprising appears in the record. The council meeting lasted barely an hour, maybe 90 minutes. Some historians have been puzzled by this, but the most likely explanation is Charles's health. He was a fragile man in a fragile body. and he managed his energy carefully. Everything in his day was calibrated. Not a minute wasted, not a minute overextended. Around 10 o'clock, the king sat down to eat. And if you're imagining a massive medieval feast with roasted boars and overflowing goblets, you're wrong. Christine is very specific. Charles did not like elaborate food. He said rich meals bothered his stomach and disturbed his memory. He drank what Christine calls clear and simple wine, light in color, well cut, meaning diluted with water, and not much quantity nor great variety. This was a king who ate for function, not pleasure, a sharp contrast to what would come just a few decades later, when his son Charles VI threw lavish banquets that became legendary for their excess, and infamous for a night in 1393, when 4 noblemen burned to death at a masked ball in this very palace. But Charles V's table had its own ritual. After the food was cleared, musicians entered. Christine compares them to King David's musicians, playing stringed instruments, the sweetest possible music, to, as she puts it, rejoice his spirits. Once the music finished, the doors opened, and the king's day entered its most politically complex phase. Christine describes the court filling with several kinds of foreign ambassadors, noblemen, and knights, of whom there was often such a crowd, both foreign and from his own realm, that one could scarcely turn around. For the next 2 hours, Charles received news from across the kingdom and beyond, reports from the ongoing wars, diplomatic proposals, updates on provincial disputes. He would make decisions on the spot, sign letters with his own hand, promise offices to loyal servants, grant favors, and reject unreasonable demands. This was the real work of medieval governance. Not in a parliament, not in a committee, but in a room, face to face, one decision at a time. By 1 o'clock, the king withdrew, and for the next hour, he rested. Completely. This wasn't laziness, it was deliberate energy management, prescribed by his physicians, including Christine's own father.
The garden is full of life
Medieval medical
today.
theory held that a balanced life required careful alternation between exertion and rest,
It is truly magnificent work.
between public performance and private recovery. Charles followed this principle religiously. When he woke from his rest, the king spent time with what Christine calls his most intimate companions, in pleasant diversions. And this is where the account gets genuinely fascinating. Charles V was a collector. Inside the Louvre, connected to his private apartments by corridors no one else could access, was the old fortress tower. And inside that tower, on 3 separate levels, the king kept his treasury. The ground floor held his jewel chamber. Golden chains, crowns, brooches, pins, salt cellars. The second floor held golden vessels, chalices, chandeliers. The third floor held precious textiles, golden brocades, costly velvets, embroidered tapestries. Christine tells us the king would walk through these rooms, admiring his collection, sometimes spending hours. It might sound like vanity, but in the medieval world, these objects weren't personal indulgences. They were the physical representation of royal authority. Displaying them, commissioning them, gifting them at New Year, this was governance in material form. But the most remarkable room in the Louvre was higher still. In the highest tower, the Falconry Tower, Charles had built something that didn't exist anywhere else in Europe on this scale: a royal library, 973 manuscripts inventoried in 1373, over 1,200 by the time of his death. Philosophy, theology, history, Aristotle's Politics and Ethics, translated into French for the first time on his orders by the scholar Nicole Oresme, treatises on astronomy, medical texts, romances, chronicles of the French kings. This wasn't decoration. Christine tells us that in winter, the king would spend hours having servants read aloud to him, find stories from the Holy Scriptures, or the deeds of the Romans, or wise sayings of the philosophers. He had a private study built right next to the library where he could read alone. He was, by every account, genuinely intellectually curious, a man who governed by day, and studied by night. And this library wasn't just for himself. He specifically wanted works translated into French so that his counselors and courtiers could access them. He was building an infrastructure of knowledge. Today, that collection is considered the foundation of what eventually became the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the National Library of France. Some of those manuscripts still survive, scattered across 30 institutions around the world. After Vespers, the evening church service, the king's day softened. If it was summer, and if Charles was staying at the Hôtel Saint-Paul, his preferred residence outside the old city walls, he would walk into the gardens. The Queen, Joanna of Bourbon, would sometimes join him with their children. He would talk with the women of the court, asking after their families. Merchants would sometimes arrive with exotic goods to display. Velvets, cloth of gold, jewels from distant lands. He would have them shown to the connoisseurs in his family. It sounds almost modern. A powerful man browsing luxury goods after work, surrounded by family and friends. The Hôtel Saint-Paul was extraordinary in its own right. It wasn't a single building, but a sprawling complex of interconnected houses, chapels, banqueting halls, and gardens, spread over 4 hectares in what is now the Marais district. Charles chose it specifically because the air was cleaner than inside the medieval city walls. The pestilential smells of Paris, the open sewers, the tanneries, the slaughterhouses, genuinely affected his health. He moved to the edge of the city to breathe.
The supper is
And
prepared
he brought something else with him. Inside the grounds of the Hôtel Saint-Paul, Charles kept a menagerie, more than 10 live lions, according to royal accounts. Lions were his favorite animal. They appeared in manuscripts made for him, in the decorative motifs of his residences, on his personal effects. The street that ran past the menagerie is still called the Rue des Lions Saint-Paul today. You can walk it. The lions are gone. The palace is gone. But the name survives. As evening came, supper was served. Christine describes it as a light meal, taken early, and then a short period of recreation with his barons and knights before the king retired to his private chambers. And the day was done, and the relentless pace of governance, even a pace as carefully managed as his, wore him down. What he left behind was complicated. His library became the seed of a national institution. His Louvre became the foundation of a world-famous museum. His model of court ritual was copied by the Dukes of Burgundy, then by the Spanish Habsburgs, and eventually echoed in the elaborate etiquette of Versailles 2 centuries later. In a sense, every time you see a photograph of a head of state hosting a formal dinner, receiving foreign dignitaries, or walking through a crowd of citizens, you're seeing something Charles V helped codify. But what happened to his kingdom was devastating. His son, Charles VI, was 11 when he inherited the throne. By the age of 24, he had descended into madness. Periods where he forgot his own name, didn't recognize his wife, ran through the corridors of the Hôtel Saint-Paul screaming, and believed he was made of glass. The 100 Years' War, which Charles V had been slowly winning, collapsed into catastrophe. The English occupied Paris. The Louvre Library, all 973 manuscripts, was purchased by the English Duke of Bedford and shipped to England, where it was eventually dispersed and lost. Almost everything Charles built was unmade within a generation. And yet, Christine de Pizan still wrote it down. 24 years after his death, she sat down and reconstructed his day, minute by minute, room by room. Not because she thought it would change history, but because she believed that how a person lives their life, how they wake, how they eat, how they treat their servants, how they balance work and rest, power and humility, tells you more about who they really were than any battle or treaty ever could. I think she was right. Sometimes we focus so much on the crowns, the wars, the grand events of history, that we forget to ask the simplest question: what did they actually do all day? When we answer that, history stops being a list of dates. It becomes a life, a human life. And suddenly, 700 years doesn't feel like very long at all. If you want to see another day in the life, maybe a Roman emperor, or a Viking jarl, or an Egyptian pharaoh, let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to see more reconstructions like this, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.